is Marie Sweeney. I am a sales representative and technical team member at Cannabis License Experts. I'm just going to wait about 30 seconds to give a few more people a moment to join us today, and then we will get right into week one of our 4 weeks of understanding your business's regulatory requirements in cannabis in Canada. Getting started today, we'll be looking at overall application, specifically closer to micro cultivation and processing. I do see that that's where most people seem to be seeking assistance at this moment, and where most people get a little bit concerned or have additional questions. So first, we're going to start with the 7 steps to prepare and apply for cannabis cultivation, processing, and medical sales uh, for cannabis with and without possession. So, first, we start with understanding the legislation. You need to know what the rules are for what you're getting into. Um, Secondly, we're going to be looking at the various license classes and how to determine which license class and subclass that you will be applying for. Um, Setting up a CTLS account for your business and for all personnel who are going to require security clearances. Gathering, sharing information, corporate profiles, application creation, and then submission and what to expect once you have submitted your application. So let's start with a Cannabis Act overview. So the reason the Cannabis Act was created, and why a lot of people go and try and read the Cannabis Act, I wouldn't worry too much about that at this point. Really, what the Cannabis Act is about is what's going to happen if you break the rules? And two, what are those rules so you know not to break them? We start with number one is always restricting youth from accessing cannabis. We want to protect the youth of Canada, control access to cannabis for adults of a legal age, provide oversight for the operation of the legal cannabis industry, as well as strictly regulate the supply chain and establish penalties to protect public safety. Okay, so regulatory operations. In order to meet the public health and safety objectives of the Cannabis Act, the commercial cultivation and processing of cannabis is highly regulated. Regulated operations and personnel operating in the cannabis industry are expected to know the following 3 things: understand the Cannabis Act, its regulations, and your obligations to it; demonstrate compliance through license application process and inspection programs; and apply this understanding to all activities, processes, and products at all times during your operation. Okay, so under the licensing under the Cannabis Act and its regulations, um, a person is required to obtain a license issued by Health Canada to do various activities with cannabis, such as growing cannabis commercially for sale, selling cannabis for recreational purposes, conducting tests on cannabis, conducting research on cannabis. Just so everyone knows, cultivators and processors are also required to obtain a separate license from the CRA, which is the Canadian Revenue Agency. Okay. So first thing you have to do is determine what your license classes and subclasses of licenses are that you will be applying for. So this is a handy little guide that you can see right here. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger for everyone. So let's say you want to grow cannabis. Do you want to grow cannabis on a large scale or a smaller scale? Or are you looking at selling clones plants? That will lead you into your next category, whether or not you're going to be cultivation at a standard or a micro level, or if you're pursuing a nursery license. Um, there's also processing activities on a large and small scale, which will determine if you want to go standard or micro processing. Do you want to sell cannabis to medical patients? Do you want to do any testing on cannabis or do research? Everyone will have access to this shortly after the end of the broadcast. So you'll be able to review these a little bit more closely. And if you have questions, you can always email myself or our general inbox at info@cannabislicenseexperts.com. So a guide for the combination of licenses and subclasses is at a single site. Um, Most people want to look at more than one activity throughout the day or throughout their operations. So this is just a little chart to let you know what you can do within the same building or within the same site perimeter, and what you if you can't combine, so that if you wanted to do that, you'd have to have a separate site. Uh, Pretty straightforward. If you want to have a standard cultivation license, you have to have a standard processing facility at the same site. If you do want to process that cannabis, if you want to sell it, you're going to need that sales amendment and product submissions for each product. There's also analytical testing and research that can be done on the product under that license, or you can apply for separate licensing if you're looking at doing maybe, you know, people touching your product and smelling your product and trying your product. Okay, so the CTLS account, what is it and how to request this account setup? So Health Canada's cannabis tracking and licensing system, known very much so as the CTLS, is a public-facing web app that enables the submissions of new license applications, requests for amendments to existing licenses, and license renewals, in addition to submission of monthly tracking reports. In order to set up your CTLS account, you have to request access from Health Canada. To do that, you access the CTLS through a GC key or a service portal. You request an access code to the system, and then you redeem the access code, which Health Canada is going to send you by email. As a note, anyone who's identified as requiring a security clearance in your application will require their own CTLS account, and their account details will need to be associated with the corporate profile and the application. So, site preparation. This is obviously a large concern for people before preparing their application. And what we're looking at first is you need to have that fully built out site that meets all of these requirements. This includes permanent systems, including such things as security systems, HVAC, your potable water, um, locking door systems. So you don't have to have your actual equipment in place. So say you're applying for a cultivation license. You don't actually have to have your growing tables and grow lights in place yet, or your racking systems for your clones and your mothers. It's permanent systems. So the things that are required to make that building run appropriately under the GPP, which we're going to get deep into next week. We also have some recommended reading for you to help you prepare yourselves for this step. There is the Physical Security Measures Guide for cannabis, as well as the Good Production Practices Guide for cannabis. These are both available through Health Canada and can be easily found in a Google search by typing those in. We also recommend doing some due diligence. So before proceeding with the build out of your site, check that your site is actually zoned for cannabis related activities. If it's not, that is not the end of the world. Um, Reach out to your local county government or town government and see if they are open to a zoning amendment. And a consultant similar to us or us, because we want to work with you, can definitely help you through that process if they are open to that zoning amendment. You also have to remember that you're responsible for complying with all laws other than the Federal Cannabis Act and regulations. So you have to consider environmental laws, for example, with provinces, and then municipal and local government laws, bylaws, policies, so things like your electrical and fire safety, noise, light, and odor controls are definitely going to be considered in here as well. So take those into consideration when building out your facility. So identifying key members of your team is also important. We're going to touch on this in a few minutes as well, but let's get started with kind of giving you an overall idea of who these key site personnel are. So first you have your RPIC. It's your responsible person in charge. Very technical term. And that's required for all licenses, regardless of what category, class, or subclass you're looking at. There's also your HOS, your head of security, also required for all license types. A master grower, which is required for micro and standard cultivation and or nursery licenses, and a QAP, your quality assurance person. This is required for micro and standard processing licenses. Note, the QAP is the only role that Health Canada has outlined specific education and experience requirements for. Everyone else, As long as you can show through your GPP reports and your OSP that these people can meet those requirements and follow the SOPs as laid out, then they are, considering that they meet their security clearances, they will be qualified for those roles. So when looking at the license application sections, it's divided into 11 sections. We have license ownership, mailing address, license classes and subclasses, which we've already touched on, site details, site ownership, notices to local authorities, your physical security, your good production practices, record keeping, all associated individuals, and a site evidence package. So before applying to determine your license, so some tips before applying, sorry. You want to make sure that you've already determined your license class, that you know your fees, and we'll get into those in a little bit too. So those are your security clearance fees, your application fees, consulting fees if you have them, as well as your annual renewals and all those fun things. So you also have to prepare your site and be aware of your GPP and security. Those need to be explained throughout your application, and they need to be visually evident in your site evidence packages. And then again, we've talked a little bit about identifying key site personnel and people with direct control of your organization and how they're going to require their security clearances as well. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So getting a little into each of those or categories or sections of the application to be prepared. One is your license ownership. You're going to have to upload a corporate profile and create one as well. You're going to have to list your key investors and upload your certificate of incorporation and any other associated documentation with your incorporation. Number two, your mailing address. It's exactly that, your mailing address. Number three is going to be your license classes and subclasses. So identifying what licenses you're applying for. Cultivation, processing, whether it's a standard or a micro, nurseries, all of the above. Well, not all of the above, but the combinations that you want to be able to hold so that you can conduct all activities that you're looking for. And again, remember that anyone with the power to influence your decisions as a business owner must be associated with your license and obtain personal security clearance. We'll get into that in a little bit further as well. So section 4, we're looking at your site details. You're going to be uploading your site drawings, an aerial view of the property, which has to be up to date. So if you've done construction and Google kind of world hasn't updated their imagery, you're going to have to send a drone up there and get some good pictures. You're also going to have to identify your latitude, and longitude geolocations, and identify outdoor and indoor areas, which ones are for cultivation purposes and activities associated with cannabis, and which ones are not. So bathrooms, hallways, visitors, lobbies, those type of things would be considered non-associated with cannabis. Next would be your site ownership. So this is specific to the site, not the corporate. So site ownership would be corporate information if it's owned by a corporation. You do also have to provide owner's consent through an attestation stating that the landlord or owner of the property is aware and approves of the fact that you will be conducting cannabis operations on their property. Next are your notices to local authorities, police, fire, and local government. We know they're not all going to love the fact that you're going to do this, but if it's zoned appropriately and you have filed the appropriate notices to them, that is your obligation. So rest assured, it's nerve-wracking going in and dropping off a letter to the police to say, hey, I want to grow cannabis, but it's not going to be held against you in any way. And it's just showing integrity that you are willing to, follow the rules. Okay, number 7 is a bit of a larger section. That's our physical security. And we, in 2 weeks from now, will be doing a full hour on just your security obligations and how to prepare for that. But for today, a general overview is your physical security is section of the application is going to include your organizational security plan, which includes your site design, your site perimeter, operations and storage areas must be identified, retention of documents and recordings must be addressed in there. Your personnel, which we've talked about a few times, as you can see, it's an important portion. And then operations designed to mitigate risk. There will be a ton of SOPs listed in your SOP with 3 to 6 sentences that are going to cover kind of a description. You don't have to actually provide your full SOPs, but you are going to have extensive lists to cover anything that could potentially happen with your site. Okay, moving into good production practices. These are a set of rules that apply to growing, processing, packaging cannabis. They're designed to ensure that cannabis products are produced, packaged, and stored in a way that minimizes potential contamination and keeps the product safe for consumers. Health Canada wants to ensure that whatever we put out into the market is not going to cause a risk to human health. Um, so the GPP program requires licensed producers to ensure the quality of their product from the seed to sale, establish programs for the quality control testing throughout the production process, and follow strict sanitation procedures at all stages of production. Okay, 9 is record keeping. This is going to be a lot of this is going to be done through your seed to sale software, which requires you to track everything from a seed that enters your facility until whatever happens to it, whether it's destroyed, it dies in the clone process, it turns into a lovely pre-roll and ends up out the door. All of this must be tracked from the moment it enters your facility until the moment it leaves your facility. So we're going to be looking at audit trails for record keeping, completed attestations, examples of your seed to sales software and associated SOPs, and descriptions of all your record keeping methods. Then we're moving into 10, your associated individuals, which we've already touched on a few times in the last 20 minutes or so, but can't, can't, can't tell you how important it is to make sure that you are accounting for everyone who is a portion of your organization, even if they're at a distance, if they could be influencing your decision process. So, a list of individuals that are associated with the application. So, that's going to be your master grower, your RPIC, your head of security, and if you're processing, your QAP. Um, that's as well your site personnel. You're going to be listing all of those out. And that also is going to include your directors, any officers of the corporation, anybody who is going to be moving money or cannabis in large amounts. And then, as well, if you're doing a processing, the QAP qualifications that show how they meet the Health Canada kind of bare minimums for your QAP. And hopefully they are exceeding those as well, so you don't run into any challenges through the review and application process. Um, those will all have to be uploaded. Then next we have a site evidence package. So a site evidence package is exactly that. You're going to be providing visuals through video and photographic evidence of everything that you've written in your application to this point. Just visual proof that what you've told them has actually been done. So again, we're going to be looking at identifying more members of your team. We've already covered the RPIC, the HOS, your master grower, and your quality assurance person. And then you also have to list, and this is where people get a little bit stuck, I think, is people with direct control. So when trying to identify who these people are, is think about these people is, are they in a position to directly influence any decisions but made by company management and operations? So if you have an investor who, if they were to pull their funding, if they said, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to pull my funding. If that could influence your decision making process because they have invested that amount of money, then those people are also going to require security clearance. So think about it this way. If you've got 10 people investing $10,000, If one of them pulls, it's not the end of the world. If you have two people investing $50,000 and one person pulls their investment, that could influence your decisions. So that's kind of a general rule of deciding how those people are identified. And as well, if you're working with an organization like Cannabis License Experts, we're pretty good at this. We have 100% success rates. So definitely feel free to work with us and we will get you through this process very cleanly. So as well, let's look at some other potential people that could be considered people with direct control. So if the applicant is an individual, you're going to have to identify them on the license application. So if the applicant is a corporation, a cooperative, or a partnership, you're going to want to identify directors, officers, and partners of the applicant or the license holder of a parent company if there is one, and anyone with that direct control. Can they influence your decisions? I know I'm going over this a lot, but it's super important. So, the application review process. What we are looking at here is once you've actually submitted your entire application, we have kind of 4 to 5 steps that kind of come post submission. So, one, you submit your application and the site evidence package through CTLS, followed by paying your application screening fees. So, just so everyone knows, if you're applying for a microcultivation or a microprocessing license, you're looking at $2,500 for your application screening fee, as well as your annual regulatory fee. So, that's an annual fee that you will be paying. If you are applying for both, it's $5,000. If you're applying at a standard level, it's $23,000 for each, or $46,000 for the one. Um, then we go through your screening process. So the application is going to be assessed to make sure everything has been uploaded correctly, it's legible, none of the documentation has been corrupted, and there is a full ability to be further assessed. You'll get notification that the screening has been completed. Then you will receive notification that the review and security clearances are being conducted. So that's going to be a detailed review of the documents submitted to the CTLS and your site evidence package. They'll also at this time conduct criminal background and law enforcement record checks for all of your associated individuals. At this point as well, you may receive what is commonly known as an RMI or multiple RMIs, and those are called requests for more information. So if in your application, your Health Canada reviewer feels you haven't provided enough information or they'd like a clearer image of something that you've claimed in your application, you've missed a section, they want to get additional details about, say, how your people and materials flow through the operation or the site, then you will start receiving these RMIs. Ideally, you have addressed it all in your application, but again, it's individuals that look at each individual application, so you never know what they are going to be asking for. So being best prepared is the best course of action. Look at your application process as a marathon and not a race. So don't sprint out the gate and then deal with all of these RMIs after you've submitted your application. Each RMI could take up to a month to review, which is really going to slow your licensing decision, which costs money on every day that that review process goes. It costs your organization some cash. So let's make sure that you're addressing everything as much as possible in your initial application, and that your only RMI is a question along the lines of, has anything changed since you submitted your application? That is the ideal RMI. Say yes, perfect. Some other instances I've seen are, again, requests for clearer pictures. Sometimes if they have concerns about movement of people or materials, they may ask for a full SOP at this point for a specific activity. Quite often destruction is something that they may ask about. Um, and they'll also inform you if anybody has failed their criminal background or law enforcement record checks. If that is done or that happens, it does happen. Not everyone is 100% honest with organizations that they join on with. If that is going to be an issue, Health Canada is going to give you time to address that and replace that member or completely remove them from the organization's organizational security charts and everything else. If that is the case, again, you will have a bit of a delay while your replacement is security cleared as well. And then what you get is your licensing decision. So I know this is a nerve-wracking process, but always consider the fact that Health Canada wants to license as many operations as possible, and they are going to work with you through the RMI process if they are concerned. But their end goal is to get you licensed. So unless it's absolutely terrible and everybody fails their security clearances, then you should be getting a positive license, but it's never guaranteed. So we ran a little short today because I haven't had a ton of questions come up in the chat. Of course, we would always love to have Google reviews and whatnot. Um, oh, sorry, just lost that. I'm just going to scroll back to a few sections here just to make sure we touched on them a little bit more in depth, just through GPP and OSP are both solidly large portions of your application. So we are going to cover those separately. Next week, we'll be covering GPP reports and what to consider when preparing them, as well as your site, because those have to go in tandem together. One has to reflect the other. And then as well, the operational organizational security plan. That is also a huge portion. So we will have that as a separate class 2 weeks out from today. Um, so let me just go back here. Do. Terribly sorry. Straight compliance. All right. So what we didn't really talk about today is the number of SOPs, because you're going to get sick of hearing the term SOP from me in the next 2 weeks. But an SOP is a standard operating procedure. And when you're working in a highly regulated industry, everything has to be recorded through one, you're telling your staff and your personnel how every step of the process in your organization happens and how to record it and how to maintain programs, how to address deviations and problems with those programs, and then as well, how to rectify those problems and update standard operating procedures. So there's a general rule is if it's not written down, it never happened. So always keep that in mind when doing anything throughout your processes. Um, you can't write things on sticky notes. Things must be signed and dated and confirmed. They need to be recorded properly. Your seed to sales software must be compliant. You are going to have monthly reporting obligations. With cultivation and processing, it's a monthly report. You are going to be reporting on everything from the number of employees that you have to the number of grams, seeds, plants that are in process, packaged goods, dried goods, curing goods, anything in your facility is going to have to be recorded throughout that process on a monthly basis. You are also going to be reporting on sales. What went to, if you're a medical license holder, what went to patients, what went to doctors and hospitals, what went to research facilities, what went to which provincial wholesaler to get it to consumers' hands on the recreational market. Uh, yeah, all of it has to be recorded. And seed to sales software makes your life a million times easier. It just kind of a lot of them are even compliant and directly log into the CTLS and will upload your report upon pressing a button, which is beautiful. Um, doing it without is incredibly stressful. What else can we go through? So site preparation. Again, we've looked at some kind of recommended reading for you, but we can get a little bit more into that today. When we talk about site preparation, your site is your facility, including any grounds. So if you're a completely indoor facility at a micro level, your rings of security can be your four walls, as long as they meet those requirements. Um, so you'll hear that a lot throughout when people, uh-oh, Oh no. Sorry, Keith. Thank you for letting me know. I'm sorry. I'm just going to turn this part off and exit out the slides, and you can just look at my shiny face. We just go towards the end here. There we go. Let me know if my voice starts looping again or if you have any specific questions. But at the moment, we were going through SOPs, recording everything, keeping it touched there. Um, let's look a little bit into, sorry, CTLS, sharing information, corporate profiles, fact and overviews. Okay, so again, we've got the licensing framework under the cannabis regulations. So in layman's terms, a lot of people will still call and be like, I want to sell weed to the government. Nobody sells weed to the government. Health Canada doesn't actually buy cannabis. What it does do is regulate our industry so that we can sell to other licensed producers and authorized retail wholesalers throughout the provincial channels. So if you are growing cannabis, you obviously need a cultivation license. Anything past growing, cutting it down, drying and curing it requires a processing license. So if you just want to break that into half quarter bags and get that to the recreational market, that's a process. If you're converting that into pre rolls, edibles, beverages, oils, capsules, sublinguals, anything else you could think of, topicals, which are my favorite category at the moment, those are all falling under processing. And of course, under yeah, again, under your micros or your standard licensing, you are able to conduct simple tests and simple research with your cannabis. So if you're phenotyping, that is completely allowed. If you're looking at smell, water moisture content, terpene profiles, I am crazy about personally. I know right now it looks like everybody's involved in the highest THC possible, but I find older cannabis consumers or longer term cannabis consumers tend to be looking a little bit more at terpene profile in combination with that THC and CBD. A lot of research is also going on in the background of these operations when people are looking at which cultivars may be producing that higher THC content, the higher CBD, CBG, CBN are both on the rise right now in terms of popularity on the consumer and medical market. And those may be kind of elements that you haven't considered yet that you might want to look at. They are not terrible ways to enter the market. Okay, what else? When looking at edibles, so let's say we're looking at processing for edibles or beverages, you're also going to have to take into account the fact that those are foods. So you are going to have to look at the Food and Drug Agency. You may sometimes see through these applications that the word FDA or the term FDA is used. Here in Canada, it's not the Federal Drug Administration. We're not American. It is the Food and Drug Act here in Canada. So those safety regulations and quality regulations that apply to food also apply to cannabis infused foods. So you're going to be looking at PCP plans, which is a preventative control plan, a HACCP plan, which is a hazard analysis and critical control point plan. So everything you do has to mitigate risk. So identifying, do certain ingredients need to be refrigerated and at what temperature? If you're baking, at what temperature and for how long do those things need to be baked? Do you have concerns about metal pieces possibly ending up in your product at the end? How are you offsetting the risk of that? Are you running a simple magnet over the end product just to make sure that everything's great? Are you using visual eyes on things? Um, there's many ways that we can be looking at all of those aspects, and you do want to make sure you've covered all your bases. The easiest way to watch a company go down is bad reviews. And the cannabis industry talks. We, as consumers and as other industry folk, we like to draw attention to shortcomings. And a bad lot could result in a bad year and possibly a bad ending to your organization. So, again, going back to those SOPs and all of those processes to ensure that you have mitigated as many risks as you could possibly identify, possibly foresee, and you are addressing those and making sure that they aren't happening. Does anybody have any questions while I talk your ears off? Please feel free to put them into the chat. I'd love to be speaking specifically to people's concerns. So please feel free to do that. And we're just going to pause for one moment. I'm just going to bring up a little bit more about our GPP so we can kind of get a little bit more understanding as to where all of that falls into our processes. And Keith, I hope we're not looping on you there in LinkedIn at the moment. If we are, let me know and I'll definitely make sure you get a copy of this at the end. Yes, you will need a site for an analytics license as well. It doesn't have to be huge. If you are, say, just running an HPLC machine, you're checking for terpene profiles, um, or THC content, water content, mold content, maybe trying to identify cultivars. I do know that that's something that people are trying to kind of come up with some IP for right now. Beautiful. You would need to have a license for research and development and analysis. But like I said, it doesn't have to be a huge facility as long as it meets all those GPP requirements. Oh, Lord. And we're getting spam. Okay. So with the GPP requirements, we are going to, as your consultant, go through several questions that we will help you identify what you need to be considering. So we're going to be looking for your full postal address, confirmation that your unit is legally severed on that property. Lots of people do that, not the end of the world. It just does need to have its own legal unit number. What type of buildings will you be using on site? Are you going to be looking at multi buildings, a single building, an outdoor grow with a single building that's fenced? Um, Describe the construction of the exterior. That's always a fun one. And how that meets the requirements to protect everything that's inside your exterior. When you're looking at the construction of the interior of the facility, is a concrete sealed with epoxy? Are there refrigeration panels? Is everything easily cleaned multiple times? Are your lights shatterproof? Do they have wire meshes over them so someone can't knock it with a big rolling rack that's going past and shatter a light that could end up putting some bad things into your product by broken glass and whatnot, then you're destroying it. Nobody wants to do that when it comes to a quality product ever. Um, then we're also going to be looking at, again, your floors. They're going to have to be able to be cleaned on a regular basis for a personal thing, not a GPP thing. Are they easily stand on for multiple hours a day? Concrete is not much fun to stand on. It's bad for backs. So if you're looking for a happy staff, you want them to have happy feet and happy backs. And next we have, you're going to want to address your air filtration system. Potable water. If it's city's municipal water, then again, that's going to be considered great. If you're doing well water, you're also going to have to make sure that you have the tests for proof that it is potable water and that all measures have been taken to eliminate any risk of contamination through your water systems. HVAC, carbon filtration. Again, you're one, You want a good breathing space for yourself and your team, and as well, you want to make sure you're not emitting any odors from your facility or your site that could upset any of your neighbors. You're going to be looking at temperature ranges for each room, humidity controls and ranges for each room, making sure they're safe and where they want to be. Then we're going to be looking at sanitation. So you're going to be looking at PPE, your personal protective equipment. I know we're all sick of hearing PPP after 2.5 years of COVID, but again, the easiest way to contaminate your product is humans. We have skin, we have hair, we breathe, and that affects our plants. And we don't want to be transferring any of that fun stuff onto our plants or our finished products. Um, are you putting your staff in scrubs, or are they going to have a uniform that is laundered off-site? What cleaning products are you using? Are they going to meet the cleaning requirements under the GPP and the sanitation requirements? Are they on a list of approved sanitation products? You're going to be looking at your pesticides and pest control products, not only for what goes on your cannabis, but what you're going to be using around the facility. Because again, there's the potential of cross contamination, and there is Pest Control Products Act that you can reference to make sure that everything you're using is permitted. Um, will you be using any pest control devices? Mouse traps, flying insects, lights, those sticky things that we like to put up in the cottage. They're also great in a grow room. Then we will be also looking at how often are your pest control programs being inspected and who's doing that? Are you bringing in Orkin Man, or do you have someone on the team who is properly trained to run those sanitation programs for pest control? Um, Cannabis waste. Nobody likes to talk about this topic, but unfortunately, if it's not hitting the market, it has to be destroyed. If it doesn't meet the testing requirements, it must be destroyed. We are still looking at Health Canada's primary recommendation is grinding it and mixing it with cat litter and disposing of it in your local landfill. But if you can, again, come up with a method of destruction that is proving to them that it can't be diverted to the black market, then we can give it a try. But I'd say almost everyone on the market right now is doing denatured with kitty litter. Um, then as well, where in the facility are you having your destruction activities take place? Um, you want that separate from anything that it could potentially contaminate. What will happen to the cannabis waste that's been destroyed? How is it leaving your facility? Where is it going to? Um, how are you storing that cannabis waste until it leaves your facility? Um, and again, how are you ensuring that it is one, not going to be getting diverted by any of your employees or visitors or contractors to your facility? And how often? You don't want to get a huge buildup of it. So take a look at, what's going to work best for your operations, but you definitely don't want a whole bunch of destroyed products sitting around your facility. Um, you're going to want to outline small pieces of equipment that's going to be used on site. Uh, Talking about how in depth this is. So you're going to be listing pruning shears, growing containers, pots, beakers, any large pieces of equipment like your packaging machines, extraction equipment, bubble bags would be considered small if you're doing keef and hash. Cleaning agents that you're using, again, are they approved? Are they going to meet the requirements for what you're doing? Um, a description of the lighting. That's your overhead lighting, not necessarily your grow lighting or any of those at this point. But really, what they're going to be looking at is what kind of overhead lightings are you using in your packaging, your dry rooms, your secure storage. Are they shatter resistant coverings? How are you protecting everything that happens in your operation? Then we are going to list out the types of cannabis that you will have on the site. So your starting materials, which could be seeds, fresh plants, mothers. Will you also have dried flower on site? If you're a processor, you're going to be starting with dried flowers. So obviously that is going to be a consideration for processors as well as microcultivators. And then what types of cannabis do you intend on selling? So that again could be wet or dry flower, cannabis plants, all of the various categories from oils to capsules to edibles to beverages to topicals. Please make more topicals. I love to buy them. That's just my personal. Then you're also going to show your product flow. So how is all of these elements of cannabis going to move through your facility and remain A, safe from contamination, and B, safe from theft and diversion? How are you transporting it between each room? What type of bulk packaging are you using? Vacuum sealed bags, airtight containers? What type of finished product packaging are you using? Obviously, they're going to be childproof, but are you using glass jars, plastic jars, doob tubes, silicone containers? I mean, it could be a variety of things. Again, as long as they meet the GPP requirements and they're not going to cross contaminate any of your product. Um, then when are you doing things like sending your product off to a lab? What lab are you sending your product to? Um, what's going to happen in terms of how you're running any mock recalls? So if there was, God forbid, something goes wrong with a lot after it's yet left your facility, how are you getting that back? And you do need to run that mock recalls so that you know that the processes that you have in place do meet all of those requirements. And then that's most of what happens under GPP. There will be further details. Just prefab building already. Sorry, Keith, I just got your note here. So yes, there are some kind of predetermined plans that are kind of out in the world. A quick Google search will show you some. There are some prefab buildings already approved in terms of meeting those GPP requirements. You are still going to have to write your own GPP report, even if you are kind of going with those C containers that are outfitted. There's a few organizations that kind of come in and set up an operation for you. We have a list of kind of people we've worked with in the past that we vetted that we know are great. So if you'd like introductions to any of those, just shoot me an email after this evening and we'll cover those. Let's see, another question. Right. Angela, yes, if you do want to package your product on your own under a brand and get it into the retail channels, you are going to require a processing license. If you're cultivating and you're cultivating a lot without a processing license, you could look at doing some co-packing agreements with another processor. Um, you could be selling your product in bulk. You could be looking at a small nursery portion and maybe focusing on genetics and rare cultivars and kind of selling those to people looking for new genetics. That's we do notice that things get a little overloaded in the industry. If one person has a WAPA, everybody has a WAPA. If one person has a wedding mince, everybody has a wedding mince. So what are you producing that's going to set you aside? And there are plenty of LPs that are out there that are seeking top quality micro cultivators without a processing license. And they're just buying bulk and selling underneath their licensing, underneath their brand. Um, sorry, Keith, prefab buildings, I haven't seen any that could be kind of shipped and dropped yet, kind of in that mobile home type world. Although, if there's any prefab in the kind of food and beverage industry, a lot of those are going to meet those requirements under the Cannabis Act. But I will find some more information and let you know if there is one out there that I just haven't been made aware of at this point. And we have, sorry, I'm just going to check for a couple last minute questions today. Okay, so testing requirements, those are always really fun. Really what it comes down to is Health Canada has concerns about how safe it is for human consumption. That is their main concern, is protecting Canadians from ourselves. is kind of an easy way to say it. But basically, what they're going to be looking at is your THC and your CBD content, as well as your THCA and your CBDA, which does convert to CBD and THC upon decarboxylation. I hate that word. I say it wrong every time. Um, as well as ensuring that it is in safe range for any pesticides, nutrients, fertilizers. So, really, again, you're looking at making sure that you are flushing your product properly before working with it post harvest. You're going to want to make sure that you are storing your product appropriately under the right conditions when you're curing it. Mold is never something anybody wants to see on a product. And obviously, it's not going to pass the biological testing if it is covered in mold. You also want to maintain those conditions that are healthy for your product. Um, as we're seeing more and more as the industry evolves is our consumers are becoming much more educated. One thing that I hear quite a bit is from the consumer side, because I do a lot of work on the retail world as well, is irradiation. People do not want product that's been irradiated. So I know larger companies and even some smaller micro cultivations do that just to ensure that there's nothing that's possibly happened to that product, or if it did happen to contain some biologics in it, irradiating it kills it all. Um, I personally haven't really noticed if there's a difference in terms of the quality of that product at the end, but let's face it, consumers' feelings and impressions make a huge effect on how they perceive your product and whether or not they're actually going to put their money where their mouth is and give it a try, regardless of what that product is. Do we have any other last minute questions? Okay, yes, you are. Sorry, this is coming from Michelle. Yes, if your mother's giving you all your startup capital, she's going to be security cleared as well, and she will be associated with your application. Proximity in terms of DNA shared does not change whether or not they need to be accounted for in your application. One thing as well that people should be aware of, it's again not a huge deal, but when you do fill out your personal security clearances, they are going to ask about your partner and their status, Canadian citizenship, if they're permanent residency, how long you've been together, and they will do a brief look into them as well. They're not going the full, fingerprint route, but they are going to make sure that, the person at home is not going to be influencing bad decisions in any way as well. Okay. Let's see. Grant. Okay, grant. No, typically when you apply, sorry, Grant's question is, will Health Canada come on site prior to issuing your license? And typically, no. Um, Especially with micro cultivation and processing and nursery licenses, your site evidence package kind of constitutes as them coming out on site, especially while COVID is still ongoing and affecting Health Canada's ability to show up on site. If you're running a standard operation, definitely expect to see them post licensing if you didn't see them pre licensing. And they may give you notice that they are showing up, or they may not give you notice that they're showing up. Typically, they do give you notice, and you have 30 days to kind of run through your operations. If that is the case, and you've never been through a Health Canada audit before, or say an inspection for food services or a food manufacturing facility, um, pre-audit inspections are a wonderful way to kind of ease your mind and make sure that everything is in place for their visit. And that is definitely something that CLE does. We will come out, we will act like grumpy Health Canada inspectors. We will redline all your SOPs. We will point out all the things within your facility that you may not see because you're there every day. That chipped wall or that corner behind the rolling rack that never seems to get cleaned because that rolling rack's just always there. We'll notice those things because we're not in your building every day. It's kind of like when your mother comes over to visit. We don't necessarily think to look at our baseboards, but your mom comes over and she's like, "Mm, think of Health Canada as your mother." And make sure that they are going to be completely comfortable with all of your operations. We're just coming up on an hour now, so if anybody has any last minute questions they want to pop in there, I've addressed all the ones that have showed up so far. And if not, we will wrap for today. And then we will get into a very deep discussion on GPP next week and SOPs. Um, it's definitely an overwhelming section for a lot of people, so I wanted to give it its own time and attention that it's needed. All right, 30 seconds to get your last questions in if anybody does have any. And if not, I'm going to. All right, well, no questions are coming in. I just wanted to thank everyone for attending today. I really appreciate anyone who wants to enter this industry, who wants to overcome the barriers and challenges and fears of entering a new industry. It is amazing once you're over here. The headaches get smaller, they don't go away. It's the fun of being part of a new industry is things are constantly changing. And what everyone should know today is that Health Canada is currently conducting a review of the Cannabis Act and its regulations. So there are some proposed changes. I don't want to get too in depth in them because nothing is set in stone at this point. But we are looking at possibly some changes in terms of edible content and the THC content. So we may be seeing larger package sizes. We may see some reclassification of CBD products and how they can be sold. Um, those are the two big ones right now that would affect kind of who I've been speaking to recently. So I am going to wrap today. If anyone would like to have a copy of today's recording, please feel free to either email myself directly at msweeney@cannabislicenseexperts.com or our general inbox at info@cannabislicenseexperts.com, and we will absolutely get you a copy of today's slides and discussions. And I'm looking very much forward to seeing everyone next week. So, again, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you for a full hour of GPP next Wednesday. Bye for now.